Hi, and welcome back to the Double Loop Podcast, your source for everything latent print related. While you're working on your comparisons, we'll talk about comparisons. I'm Eric Ray.
And I'm Glenn Langenberg.
And thank you for joining us again. We're trying this out for the first time, recording things separately. Last couple episodes, we were in the same room at the vendor hall of the IAI conference. Tonight I'm in Arizona.
And I'm here in St. Paul, Minnesota.
And we're going to try now. We're recording via Skype, so we'll see how it goes with this method. But it looks like we're going to start off the show talking about some recent news stories that have been out related to latent prints.
Right, yep. A couple of interesting case decisions have come out. And just for some clarification, too, we should probably let the listeners know that this isn't just about latent prints, that we also have people in Temp-Prints that have been interested in listening to the show. So we should probably change that to all things related to fingerprints and forensic science in general.
You're right. It's a work in progress. We'll kind of adjust the show as we go until we kind of hit on the exact right formula.
Yes, exactly.
The first case we're going to bring up came out a couple months ago out of New Mexico in the case against McCluskey. And first there was a court decision called the McCluskey report, and then more recently, what was the more recent thing, Glenn?
Well, the decision that I saw was, there was really two aspects. The judge was allowing the fingerprint evidence, but there was some concern. Well, he essentially was allowing the fingerprint evidence to come in, but he was excluding essentially the inconclusive decision. That, but not because of the reliability of the evidence. It passed, in his view, the reliability test, but it didn't pass the relevance test. That an inconclusive was essentially irrelevant to the issues that the prosecutor is putting forward.
Yeah, and the other interesting thing I saw in there was that the judge was not going to allow the fingerprint examiner from New Mexico to testify to 100% certainty or zero error rate. All those things that have been through the field for the past few years.
Right.
The more recent thing, the judge denied a motion to keep out the fingerprint evidence, and the defense in the more recent one was stating that because the fingerprints hit in APHIS, and APHIS as a system has a, quote, 50% error rate, that it shouldn't be allowed in.
Oh, I know what you're... Yes, now I know which case you're referring to. Right.
And I never heard a defense make that specific claim before. It seems kind of a new tactic. Have you heard something like this before?
No, I haven't. I almost had to wonder if it wasn't some weird confusion on someone's part, because we've heard in some of the error rate studies that have been done that depending, for example, on which critic is citing the error rates. For example, I have this personal experience that Ralph Haber, because he will include in his error rate calculations no value and inconclusive decisions, as essentially failed to identify when they are coming from the same source, so they essentially get counted in as errors. I've witnessed him in a court of law testify, that in this particular study, the error rate was 30%, 40%, 50%, 60%. So I almost wondered if it wasn't a confusion on that, as opposed to something with APHIS. I can't think of a single paper or instance where somebody has said APHIS makes mistakes 50% of the time. And
the only thing I could think of was that, an APHIS system isn't a perfect thing that's not going to find it every time. And maybe there was someone, even in just New Mexico, who had stated that their system typically finds people about 50% of the time when a fingerprint is entered in for search.
Right. Interesting, yeah. Another possibility is they could have been referring to the paper that Casey Wartime and E.T.L. Dror wrote about APHIS bias. I think that came out last year. So, I don't know where that number is being pulled from. It sounds... it sounds obviously pretty outrageous.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing with that, including those inconclusive things like Ralph Haber does, when it's touching an item, since there's no guarantee that a latent print at even an identifiable imprint is left, I don't see how that those can be counted in as errors, when that's not a guarantee that it's even left in the first place.
Right, and in fact, I'm thinking in this particular hearing where I did, have to testify with Ralph Haber, I showed an image of a fingerprint which was just a pure smudge. I mean, there was no ridge detail whatsoever, but the ground truth was I was the source of that latent print. But yet, if that had been given to a latent print examiner in a test, that would have been counted against them as an error if they had reported inconclusive or no value. Because essentially they failed to identify when the ground truth was known that I was the source of that. It's at best it's misleading, and at worst, I mean, it's really it seems out of bounds, and I can't see how someone rational would look at that and go, well, that's clearly an error because you didn't identify it when we had the ground truth.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree with you on that.
Yeah.
Well, so the Arizona link to that McCluskey case is, just to kind of work backwards now, is McCluskey and I think his wife/cousin and another inmate escaped from a prison in Arizona and disappeared for a while before they were finally caught a few weeks later. But in the meantime, they had killed an Oklahoma couple in New Mexico. Now, you had another recent news story that caught your attention. Is that right?
Yeah, well, it's actually another paper that kind of got me a little bit fired up. I was looking at the Huffington Post, and essentially the title of it was that crime labs are being paid for erroneous convictions. And, of course, this catches my eye, and I explore a little bit further. I was referring to a paper that came out not too long ago by Roger Koppel and Megan Sachs. And had you had a chance to read this paper? Do you know this paper?
No, I'm not aware of this.
Okay. Well, this Roger Koppel is a professor of finance in the Whitman School of Management in Syracuse, New York, and Megan Sachs is an assistant professor of criminology in the Department of Social Science at Fairleigh Dickinson University. And
Fairleigh Dickinson?
Fairleigh Dickinson.
Not fully Dickinson, but just Fairleigh Dickinson.
Fairleigh Dickinson. Yes.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
Yes, partially Dickinson.
Partially Dickinson.
Right. And anyway, this article, the Huffington Post is seizing on, and they're really making it very sensational. The author in the Huffington Post goes on to say, well, it's obvious why so many crime labs are rife with scandals when essentially you're paying your scientists to convict people. And that's sort of the point of this article. So the title of the article is The criminal justice system creates incentives for false convictions. So that's our starting point right there, that the criminal justice system is set up right now with incentives for false convictions. And let me just read you the opening line of the paper. Police, prosecutors, and forensic scientists often have an incentive to convict someone with little or no incentive to convict the right someone. That's your opening sentence. So,
wow.
Yeah, right. And I just have to, and I've met Roger Koppel. He's a very nice man. He's very bright, very smart. But when I read this, I go, clearly, these people do not have any friends or family who are police prosecutors or forensic scientists. Because the notion that we just want to convict someone, we don't care if it's the right someone, I mean, it's so offensive. I mean, to start off this paper with such an offensive statement, I mean, it just turns you off for the rest of it. It makes it very hard to digest some of the good points that are in there, and they do point to some things that are fairly interesting and possibly, could explain some bias issues that we are aware of and have seen in some of the research. But I mean, they talk about the incentives of police, they talk about the incentives of prosecutors, but I'll jump to the incentives of forensic scientists, which, of course, is directly
most interested in.
Right, exactly, because, I want to see what I'm being accused of.
Right, exactly.
And so what they essentially talk about is that a lot of states have they're basically court fees that if there's a conviction, if someone's convicted, they often have to serve time, and then there are some fees they have to pay, the court fees. And wrapped up in those court fees are monies that go to the crime lab. Essentially, in some of the, especially like drunk driving, that's a real good one. Breath alcohol, blood alcohol, where part of the court fees are also going right back to the crime lab at some point. The paper's not real clear, tracking the money, but they show that in certain states, a large number of states, the court fees often have an element that goes to reimbursing the crime lab. So were you aware of that?
I am aware that, at least, again, my experience here in Arizona, that some of the monies from drunk driving, and Arizona has extremely tough DUI laws, are supposed to be set aside for the crime lab. Now, from talking to people that have been around the state crime lab for a number of years, they've said that those funds are swept into the kind of general fund for the state.
Yes.
Every year, and have been for basically forever. But
well, in fact, in Arizona is mentioned here in the paper. It says that the following states also require crime lab fees in connection with various conviction types: in Arizona, California, Missouri, Tennessee, Wisconsin, so on. So it does even mention that here. But what the paper essentially, I won't even say that I won't suggest that it implies it. It comes right on and says it. It basically says that for every conviction that you get, you, Eric Ray, for every conviction you get, you're bringing the crime lab money. So you have an incentive to identify people and get convictions for the prosecution because you are helping the crime lab make money. That's the element of the paper. That's the thesis of the paper. Isn't that... It's insanity to me to think that someone is going to call something identification and with the notion that I need to call this so that I will continue to have a job because the crime lab will get money from this.
It would be so easy if that was going on, routinely making identifications to convict people in order to get the funds. That means they're implying these would be erroneous identifications. It would be so easy to find them then. And while there are some erroneous identifications out there, they're not they're not that many of them. Virtually every erroneous identification I can think of has been demonstrated by another latent print examiner. So, there's obviously latent print examiners out there willing to recognize mistakes when they happen and point them out, when they happen, to, kind of keep our discipline as accurate as possible.
Yeah. There's no doubt that, like you just said, it's the fingerprint examiners that have been finding them. But, I think what strikes me about the paper is while it brings up a nice miasma of theories and ideas of how these things are sort of related, and of course it cites a lot of research, Dror and Charlton studies about bias and things that we're not disputing. We're not disputing that bias doesn't exist and that these things can't influence forensic scientists. But the notion that we're all aware of it, and that's my first thing is, how many forensic scientists are actually acutely aware that there is some amount of money coming to the lab per conviction? Because Eric, how many times have you made identifications and actually found out whatever happened to your case? In most of the cases I work, I have no idea if the person ever is convicted, if there's a plea. I have no idea. I don't even know if half the time if I'm identifying a true victim or a suspect in the case.
Exactly.
We don't know what often happens on the other end.
And again, I haven't been doing this as long as you have, Glenn, or as many of our listeners. I've been in the field 6 years now, and I think I have one case that I can think of where I know what the end verdict in the case was.
Wow, one.
And one. I've only gone to testify 5 times now. It's just the huge, vast majority of the time when I write my report, it just kind of goes off into somewhere Did you ever watch Lost, Glenn?
Yeah,
Remember
yeah,
that show?
I did. I finally got into it. Although I have to tell you, I waited until the entire show was over and then marathon the whole thing, which I hear is the way to watch that show.
Uh, I got into it a few years late, and then watched everything except for the last season. I just somehow lost interest right before the end. But my point is that at some point in that show, there's someone who's supposed to be sending reports into those old vacuum tubes that suck away
Oh, yes.
the tube, and then later on in the show, that it shows that all these capsules have been just spitting out into a giant pile that no one ever looks at. And sometimes when I write my reports, it feels like they're just going away and it's just being filed or dumped into some corner where no one ever reads them.
Right, we just send reports off into the nether realm, and where they go or what effect they have. That's a great way to describe it. We really have no idea.
And that's fine. I actually have no problem with that. I enjoy comparing prints. Finding who left this print is interesting and challenging and fun for me. But problem to solve is who left it, not how I can ensure that I get a paycheck, because that
it results in a conviction.
Never find out.
Yeah, right. Well, and I think that's going to be my second point with this paper, is that there's no evidence here of causality. That, they're raising that. I'm not disputing that crime labs don't get some money out of these court fees, or even in some states where there's federal funding. If the for the crime lab to calibrate intoxilizers, or breathalyzers, or whatever instruments being used. I know that there are federal funds that get tied into crime labs and that sort of stuff. So I don't dispute that fact at all in the paper. But to me, there's no causal link showing that forensic scientists, or even police officers, or prosecutors for that matter, are in some way considering this monetary aspect, and that's directly leading to incorrect convictions. So I read the paper and it gets me all fired up, because this just plays into the hands of almost conspiracy theorists that the crime labs are rife with these scientists who are biased, and this is yet one more bias that's playing into it, is our cha-ching factor.
Well, let me ask you, and I can say that it's never happened for me, but have you ever been approached by anyone at your lab saying that, in the past few months, the number of IDs that you've made has been lower than your coworkers?
No, I'm laughing just hearing that thought. I would imagine that no one in our lab has any idea how many identifications anyone is making in our lab. We actually have started keeping track data, but no one knows those numbers. They're not, written, on some board somewhere.
I know there are some labs that keep track, in general, of the number of cases that you put through.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the number of identifications, and then even past that, the number of identifications that lead to conviction, I would have no way of. I can't even imagine how our agency would begin to track that.
Right. So one of the things that you and I have talked about offline a little bit is to we had a suggestion from a listener to create a landing pad, or landing page. Is that correct? A landing page?
That sounds about right. I'm going to begin work here soon on a Double Loop podcast webpage where we could have each episode available for listeners to pull up, and with also information about each episode, maybe the links to these articles that we've been talking about.
Right. That
may
exactly
be a few weeks down the road, because there's some work into getting something like that up and running. But definitely, I'm going to see what I can do about that.
Yeah, that's exactly why I was bringing it up. Was just so some of these articles we're referring to, we can try to make them available, but people can always email us for any of these, and I can give the email now. It's Glenn, Glenn, at eliteforensicservices.com. Email me, and I'm happy to share this with you, and so you can see some of these articles and cases we're talking about. So that's news I have. Any other news bits on your end, Eric?
I think that kind of covers it for this week.
All right.
Hi. This
podcast is brought to you by Elite Forensic Services. Elite Forensic Services provides quality forensic services by distinguished forensic professionals. We provide expert consultation for prosecution or defense, criminal or civil, on forensic cases and specialize in fingerprints, DNA interpretation, bloodstain pattern, and other types of forensic evidence. We can also provide customizable training and SOP development for your agency. Check out EliteForensicServices.com for upcoming training courses and workshops. Thanks, and back to the show. So that's going to bring us to the next part of the show, which you and I discussed what should we do with show number 3. And since we're just getting to know the listeners a little bit and just sort of getting to put our voices out there, we should title this show, Who the Hell Are Glenn and Eric? And so we decided we'd take a little bit of time to almost interview each other and try to explain to the listeners who we are and why would we want to do a podcast.
Well, first of all, I think everybody would know who you are, Glenn.
I would disagree.
Be a little more of an enigma in this podcast, but surely everybody knows Glenn Langenberg.
Not surely. Surely you must be joking.
Oh, yes. It's sad to say that we may have some new latent print examiners who've never actually seen Airplane and may not get that reference.
Right. Well, I'm pouring a glass of wine right now because it's a nice Friday evening, late at night. And I'm going to relax, and I'm going to ask you some questions, Eric.
Okay. Go ahead, Glenn. Shoot.
All right. First of all, so how many times have you been confused with Napoleon Dynamite?
Boy, the first question, that's great. Actually, I think I might get Dirk Nowitzki more often than Napoleon Dynamite, but gosh, Glenn, gosh.
All right.
Since that movie came out, I have been a few times. I did a Parks and Recreation volleyball season with some coworkers a few years ago, and there was one team.
Nothing related to the show Parks and Recreation with Leslie Knope and Ann Perkins. No, okay.
No. But there's one team that there's a guy there that every time, we get to play the Napoleon Dynamite team. Even better though, probably 4 or 5 years ago, went through Ron Smith's palm print class. It was advanced palm print techniques.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of the last classes that Ron himself actually taught, and he called me Napoleon Dynamite that entire class period.
I'm impressed Ron knows that movie.
Evidently, and with his Mississippi accent, that was some experience there.
That's great. All right, so you are you're what, 6'10", 7'5"?
I actually like to call it 5'17", and it gets people to kind of pause for a second, do some math, and I stand out in a crowd. Like I said, 6'5" with a mop of blonde hair, so I'm fairly easy to spot.
All right, so you said earlier you've been doing this, what, 5 years now?
6 years.
6 years. Okay, 6 years. I remember when I first met you. You were actually taking one of my classes. I was teaching a class there in Mesa, Arizona, and you did very well in the class. I believe you did like top in the class or close to top in the class.
Yeah, I think I came in a close second in that class. That was the first external training I took. Was when I met you at that class. That was almost 6 years ago now.
Yeah. And you work for Arizona Department of Public Safety, correct?
Yep. I'm in their Central Regional Crime Lab. I had a couple years out in Lake Havasu City at their Western Regional Crime Lab before coming back to the Phoenix area.
Okay. And how did you get into fingerprints? How did you get hired at that lab? And did you always want to be a fingerprint examiner when you were a wee little Eric Ray?
Was I ever a wee little Eric Ray? It's been a long time, I guess. But no, it's kind of funny. I'd always, even I remember in high school and college, just in a random class, whatever I was taking, would just to kind of distract myself from whatever the professor was talking about, touch the little clip on my pen. I've got double loop whorls on my thumbs, and I try to just kind of line up the double loop whorl with the pen, and then kind of look at it in the light, never thinking that someday I'd actually be comparing those kinds of fingerprints every day. But I went to the University of Arizona, studied biochemistry and biology. Eventually applied for the crime lab at DPS. I was, got interested in that. I thought it was something I'd be good at after bouncing around with a few other jobs. And when they said that the spot that's available is for in the latent print unit, I said sure, I'll take it. I had no idea what what that entailed. I remember my first day on the job, my trainer was going over some basic terms, but loop, whorl, arch, and I'm furiously writing these things down because I'd never heard these terms before. I don't know, things have kind of turned out okay. I really enjoy my job, and am glad that I kind of lucked into latent prints as the unit that I first got assigned to.
Sure. Did they have any kind of test, or like a here's some fingerprints, see how you do, for the job, or was it more of just a basic civil service kind of job, interview test?
In Arizona, the hiring process starts off with just a general written test on forensics.
They don't make you stand outside in the heat for 10 minutes and see if you pass out?
If you live here, you're kind of used to that already.
I would imagine that's a good way to screen people from out of state.
Just fly them in during the summer and see if they run screaming back to the airport.
Right, exactly.
If they come here in January or February, they may want to just stay forever. But it was just a general written test, a general set of questions about as an oral board, and then you got ranked on a list as to how well you did, and they went down the list and asked if you'd like a job in this unit or that unit at the central lab or a regional lab. I honestly think that I got hired because I was willing to do latent prints out in Lake Havasu City, and
funny how that is.
that was good enough at the time, and I'm just kind of glad that the whatever series of fortunate events that led me to that point, got me there, so I could end up where I'm at.
All right. So you've been doing this for 6 years now. You are certified, yes?
Yes.
Yes, of course. And you also have published a paper, at least one that I know of. Have you any others? And do you want to talk about the paper that you published?
Yeah, no, the paper, I was really excited that got accepted by the JFI. Came out almost a year ago in the November 2012 edition of the JFI. It was really hearing people like you, Glenn, and Alice Maceo talk about getting involved in the discipline, getting out there, doing some sort of research, finding an interesting question that you can grab onto. That really encouraged me, pretty early in my career to talk to the higher ups in my agency and say, hey, I want to do this, and then move forward with it.
Okay, that's cool. And we got to get Alice on the show. That's
exactly.
That's a must. We got to get Alice.
So the topic was on the palm print frequencies, the frequencies of different patterns in palm prints, and it took a while to go to sift through lots of data. Learned a lot about Excel spreadsheets, and found some interesting, surprising things I didn't know about where different patterns show up in the palms.
Right, and if I recall, essentially a lot of the things that you might get in Ron Smith's palm print class, which is now demystifying. It's or is it just palm prints?
I think it's advanced palm print comparison techniques or something like that.
Something like that, and it's taught by Jamie Bush with Ron Smith and Associates. And so a lot of the clues for searching in there, you explored those and looked at the frequencies of those in palm prints, correct?
Correct.
And you looked at, what, a set of 400?
About 500.
500, okay, 500.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty meaty set. That's a pretty big set.
Yeah, it was things like how the vestiges that you get, they're more common in the left hand, and I think that was fairly common knowledge in the discipline. What was more interesting was that you almost never get them in the right hand by themselves. It's either in both hands together on an individual or just in the left hand.
Yeah, I remember when you presented that in when you were showing the data, and that I did not know that. That was really kind of cool. So it's sort of, if it's present on the left hand, there's some probability increase that it'll be on the right hand, but if it's not on the right hand... No, I got it backwards.
Oh, you got it backwards.
You got it backwards, right. But clearly...
If it's in the left hand, if it's in the right hand, it's almost always going to be in the left hand.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
The other big one was the loop in the interdigital area. On the left hand, it's almost always between the ring and little fingers. In the right hand, it's kind of evenly split either between the ring and little, or about half the time between the middle and ring.
So of course I'm looking at my palms right now. I had to look this up, and that's exactly how my palms are. Yeah, I imagine there are many listeners now who are looking at their palms and seeing if that fits for them.
I have another paper coming out in this year's November issue of the JFI that I co-wrote with my co-worker and technical lead at Arizona DPS, Penny Deckent. And it's going to be on standards and sufficiency for the exclusion decision. So we're really anxious to see that come out and see what kind of feedback we get from that.
Okay, well, that's very cool. Well, that's really cool, Eric. So thanks for sharing that with us. And I'm sure as we do more and more of these, we'll get a chance to share personal stories and get to know you a little bit. And maybe in the next episode, I'll talk about myself a little bit. And,
oh yeah, I've got to get you on in the interview chair for the next episode.
All right, let me finish my wine, and then I'll be all ready to spill the beans. All right, so we're going to leave it here, and do you want to sign off?
Thank you for joining us this week on the Double Loop Podcast. You can find us every Tuesday on SoundCloud.com, and very soon we will be available through Stitcher and through iTunes. So that is exciting. We'll be available to an even bigger audience than the throngs that are listening right now.
All right.
So good night, everybody, and we'll see you next week.
All right. Goodbye.
Hey, everybody. Be sure to check out EliteForensicServices.com for upcoming training courses. We have great workshops and courses such as Advanced ASB Applications and Reducing Erroneous Exclusions. Go to www.EliteForensicServices.com today.
Music provided on this podcast by Mevio's Music Alley. Check it out at music.mevio.com.